Hi, this is Heather Staker from Ready to Blend, here with an implementation tutorial for student-centered learning. This tutorial is called Build Your Culture Around Compatible Resources, Processes, and Priorities. It's brought to you by the Wisconsin Resource Center for Charter Schools and the Wisconsin Digital Learning Collaborative, or WDLC. Let's start here. What is your organization capable of getting done? What can your school accomplish? What can your individual classroom accomplish? What is beyond the realm of possibility? To analyze that, it all comes down to what Professor Clayton Christensen has called the RPPs. That's short for Resources, Processes, and Priorities. Those elements define what you can accomplish and what you can't. Resources then are the most tangible factors. They include the people in your organization or classroom, your equipment, your supplies, your technology, your budget, your parents, your vendors. Resources are usually somewhat flexible. You can move them around and invest more in one resource than another. The next element that determines what you can accomplish is your processes. Processes are the patterns of interaction, of communication, of coordination, and decision making through which you get things done. So processes include the way you teach and learn, the way you budget, the way you do professional development, and the different routines that are in place in your classroom or school. The third element that determines what you can get done is your priorities. These are also called your values. Your priorities are your standards for deciding where to focus, what's worth your time, and what to put first. Everyone in your organization makes decisions, including the teachers and the students and the parents, the administrators. They make decisions in part based on what they think will lead to success. So how do you define success? Is it your test scores? Is it student enrollments? Is it teacher retention? The way you define success has a lot to do with your priorities. They reflect your priorities. So taken together, the resources, the processes, and the priorities of your school or classroom are what determine what you can accomplish and what you can't accomplish. We call this the RPP framework, and it is at the heart of your culture. So it's critical as we talk now about building your culture around compatible resources, processes, and priorities. Please open the worksheet that goes along with this video. It's a fillable PDF called What Are Your RPPs? The first step on that worksheet is to list your top resources. As you'll remember, resources can include people, equipment, technology, facilities, budget, vendors, and so on. Pause the video if you need to and fill out your resources. Now let's list your main priorities. What values help you determine where to focus? How do you define success? So for example, at Farmington High School, the principal, Richard Swanson, articulated 3 top priorities for his school. He said his priorities were prepared, personalized, and purposeful. You'll likely have your own priorities that might be different from those, but what's important is that you think carefully about what your values are, just like Principal Swanson did, and then articulate them clearly. Pause the video if you need to and write down your priorities. Third, list your processes. What are some of the main routines you use to get things done? List a few of the routines you use for teaching, for deciding on grades, for running the program administratively, for working with parents, for helping equip students to learn, and so forth. Your processes are likely to be the most open-ended part of your RPP framework at this point. So for example, your resources might be somewhat determined already, somewhat locked in terms of what your facilities are, what your technology looks like. And perhaps outside forces like the school board or other leaders have already identified your priorities to some extent for you. They've already told you what success looks like, perhaps. But in most cases, school leaders and teachers have a lot of control over their processes. So that's going to be a place we really can affect in order to bring about cultural change. Cultural alignment happens when the resources, processes, and priorities are complementary and working together to help your organization achieve its very best. Let's look at a few hypotheticals to decide whether or not this is an example of cultural alignment or culture clash and where the violation's happening. So here's the first example. Suppose that your priorities are the same as that Farmington High School example I gave you. Suppose you've said, okay, our priorities are that we are prepared, we're personalized, and we're purposeful. Now suppose that you observe that during work sprints, when students are supposed to be working online independently or collaboratively with their peers, some of them are watching YouTube videos. That contradicts your priorities, I would argue. Now I want you to think about which priority does it contradict the most. Does it contradict the priority of being prepared. For after all, if students are spending their time on YouTube, they're wasting the chance to prepare for their futures. Or you might argue that it clashes the most with purposefulness, because watching a Taylor Swift video on YouTube is not terribly purposeful. Or you might say it clashes the most with personalization, because the environment is not set up to help each student reach his or her own personal best. Take a stand. Which of the priorities that I've given you as a hypothetical would you say this observed process clashes with the most? Let's turn to the next hypothetical. Now suppose that your middle school students need behavioral norms to govern how they participate during class, whether that's in-person class or synchronous online sessions if you're an online classroom. You all agree that they will brainstorm the 6 to 7 norms that are the top norms that they agree to follow, and then sign a community contract to uphold them. So this is the process you've established. Now, hypothetically speaking, suppose your priorities are still prepared, personalized, and purposeful. Which priority does this process of writing community contracts and having everyone sign them together, what priority does that align with the best? I think it complements your priorities. I'm asking you to choose which priority do you think it complements the most. Does it most complement prepared, personalized, or purposeful? Take a position and defend your choice. Let's look at hypothetical 3. Suppose a student shows disrespect for a teacher, so the teacher yells at the student. So that's the process that the teacher chooses for solving the problem. Which priority does that process clash with the most? Prepared, personalized, or purposeful? Pause the video and defend your choice. I saw a scenario like this at a school that I was visiting a few years ago, and it still haunts me to this day. And I would imagine that for that teacher and for that school, the process that this teacher had chosen for solving the problem did not align with their priorities. Okay, hypothetical 4. Here's the 4th problem. The teacher needs a way to give students instruction. The process she chooses is to post the instruction and assignment either on the learning management system or on a whiteboard so that students can self-direct their own learning and have the information they need right when they personally need it. So that's the process. Which priority does this process complement the most? Prepared, personalized, or purposeful? Pause the video and defend your choice. Okay, last hypothetical. The first 4 hypotheticals focused on the cultural alignment between processes and priorities. It's also possible to analyze the alignment between your resources and your priorities. So let's imagine this hypothetical. Suppose that the problem is that your school needs a new learning management system, a new LMS, and you choose to license an LMS that specializes in a really tremendous student-facing data dashboard. So the student has great visibility into exactly where they are in their learning and how much progress they're making each day. I would argue that that resource decision complements your priorities, of being prepared, personalized, and purposeful. My question for you is, which of those priorities would you say it complements the most? Now turning to page 2 of your worksheet, it's time to analyze your cultural alignment, your own cultural alignment. So we just looked at a bunch of hypotheticals. Let's think about your own RPPs and whether they complement each other or whether they clash and they contradict each other. Which processes in your organization or classroom would you say complement your priorities the most? Which processes would you say contradict your priorities the most? And then how about your resources? Which complement your priorities and which contradict your priorities? As you get better at analyzing your RPPs, you'll become an expert at aligning your culture. This is Heather Staker from Ready to Blend.